to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with George Winkler, and today we preview the AFC West, which, you know, it has a reputation for being really rough and tumble, especially in the stands in past years. You can talk about the black hole. You can talk about how in Denver the fans are crazy, how in Kansas City those people will go out there in 25 degrees in December for anything. And of course, they're the Charger fans who barely exist, but we forget about them when we talk about these sorts of things. But on the field, and especially from a fantasy perspective, I tend to think there are a lot of good opportunities for undervalued players in this division this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's the wild, wild west for a reason, and that's true on the field, too. And one of those undervalued guys that you could talk about is Vincent Jackson of the Chargers. I see him being a lot like Dwayne Bowe last year. A guy you could pick up in the fourth round, and a guy who could go off for double-digit touchdowns real easy. He says he's going to behave this year, play with the tag, and has a nice combination of things: height, speed, and ability to dominate in the red zone.
See, I figure Jackson, and as long as we're talking about Jackson, we'll get to the other Chargers first. But Jackson, I think, benefits more from Phillip Rivers. And just about any receiver that gets his role is going to do fairly well. But Jackson's better than the likes of Legedu Nene that have been out there in previous years. And one of the things that is going to be in play in your leads is a little bit of psychology with the other guys that are in your lead, or women, you know, that they may remember that Vincent Jackson was awesome for the Chargers. They might not remember just how awesome he was and how awesome he could be again.
Yes, he has the ability to lead the league in yards per catch, and for a guy that's 6'5", that's rather rare. And if he steps up this year, of course, that's going to mean bad things for Malcolm Floyd, who was filling in for Jackson last year when he was having his contract dispute with A.J. Smith. But yes, when you have Phillip Rivers throwing the ball to these guys, I mean, 3 straight 4,000-yard seasons. He led the NFL with 4,710 yards last year. This guy is just, he's great. And you have him in those late games on the West Coast, and it's kind of fun because you let your opponent get a big lead, and then Phillip Rivers just reels them in the end.
Would you pick Rivers among the top 3 quarterbacks in the league, fantasy quarterbacks?
You know, he certainly performs like that. I don't think he will be picked that way. I think, you know, you're still looking at Michael Vick and Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, but he's the one elite quarterback that has the unique quality of being like a value pick as an elite quarterback, because you can get him a couple of rounds later than Brady.
What about Antonio Gates? This is the third guy on the Chargers that will be picked fairly high. He's probably the only tight end, well, one of 2, maybe 3 tight ends that will get high round consideration, along with Dallas Clark and Jason Witten. He had foot injuries last year. He played brilliantly through them for a while, but then missed a lot of games. How do you see his season developing?
He's the best fantasy tight end, period. And if he stays healthy, that's going to be that way. Even though he missed 6 games last year, he still outscored every tight end. I mean, just think about that. 6 games he missed, and he still outscored every tight end. So, you know, he's my number 1 guy. I still question whether it's worth it, though, to pick an elite tight end in the 4th round. The trade-off might be too great. You still want to be adding running backs and wide receivers at that point, in my opinion.
I maintain that Antonio Gates last year, until he got hurt, was the runaway fantasy MVP, even ahead of Michael Vick. And the reason being that he was basically doubling up on the point totals of the next best tight end, who for a long time was Tony Moyaki, and then a few other people came in around there. If you get that kind of difference at your tight end position and you're merely hanging in with everyone else, you've got a really good shot of winning week in, week out, because your main thing in fantasy football, 99% of leagues, is you just want to be better at the different positions than your opponent. You're not necessarily trying to pile up points over the course of a season like most baseball roto leagues.
I agree with that. It's all about the difference of scoring that you get from your guy to the opponent's guy. But I would argue that season that Gates had last year was just like, that's like the pinnacle. That's the piece de resistance of tight end. You know, it might not get any better than that.
Really quickly before we move on to the Nets teams, running back for San Diego is such a weird situation. They let LaDainian Tomlinson go, thought they would be leaning on Ryan Matthews, didn't really get to lean on him as much as they wanted to in his rookie season. They're saying they're going to go with 2 running backs again now that Matt Tolbert has emerged. How do you see that breaking down?
Well, I'm still willing to give some benefit of the doubt to Matthews. He had fumbling problems last year. He got an injury early on that nagged him. So he had a couple of little excuses that if he clears up this year, he should be able to take over and be, at least get the majority of touches over Tolbert and have some bounce back appeal this year because we expected so much from him last year.
Let's talk about the Chiefs now. We've mentioned Moiaki, we've mentioned Dwayne Bowe, but we have not mentioned one of the best fantasy players and a guy who may cause some controversy depending on how high or how low he's picked in your draft, Jamal Charles. I mean, this guy on a per carry basis has been incredible over 2 years. But I don't think he's actually going to be picked in most leagues top 3 just because Thomas Jones has been getting so many carries.
Well, they say that the carries are going to go down for Thomas Jones this year, and I think Jamal Charles might be the best guy in the draft. I'll say that right now.
That's bold.
that per carry average is outstanding. Obviously, he needs to score more touchdowns to make that come true, but it's going to go Adrian Peterson, Chris Johnson, Arian Foster, some order there, and then it has to be Charles 4. I mean, for me, it has to be Charles 4. I take him over Michael Vick, and I take him over Ray Rice. I think he's that explosive. And with Charlie Weiss leaving, their line coach is now the offensive coordinator, Bill Muir, and well, you know what line coaches like to do.
Yes.
They like to run the football, and the Chiefs are one of the few teams that ran the ball more than they passed it last year.
And if you're thinking rationally, you want to put the ball in your best player's hands. When you pass the ball, hopefully you're getting it into Charles or Dwayne Bowe's hands, but it also has to pass through Matt Castle, and he hasn't been the greatest quarterback, though he has been passable.
Yeah, and it doesn't pass through his hands enough. That's the problem.
Right.
I mean,
Charles's hands.
He's a good quarterback. Castle is. He got 27 touchdown passes last year. 15 of them went to Dwayne Bowe. But he barely got over 3,000 yards, and that's just a function of the Chiefs running the ball so much.
And they're good at it, so they should keep doing it. Yeah. I hope, at least, for Jamal Charles as fantasy owners.
I love Jamal Charles.
Yes. Let's move on to the Broncos. One of the things about Denver this year is that whether implicitly or just however you want to phrase it, they're rebuilding. The problem is that with their quarterback situation overshadowing everything, they've named Kyle Orton the starter. The organization doesn't seem to want him to be the starter, though, even though, straight up, real-life football, I'd take him over Matt Castle in a heartbeat.
Yeah, he produced better than Matt Castle last year. The big wild card with the Broncos is their new coach. It's John Fox, and he comes from Carolina, and he is a conservative coach, and he likes veterans. So it's not a real surprise to me that Kyle Orton is the front runner, and Tim Tebow has slipped to 2, and even maybe 3, they're saying, with Brady Quinn performing well in the preseason. That seems really crazy to me. I thought Tebow was kind of like a poor man's Michael Vick at the end of last year.
It's more like the organization is split, where Fox probably doesn't want to put Tebow in just because he sees what a lot of outside analysts see, which is that he needs a lot of work in order to be a drop-back passer, especially coming from under center, whereas the higher-ups in the organization are thinking to themselves, well, I'm going to be here 5 years from now. I want Tebow to get his reps in now.
It's kind of real confusing because Orton did really well in the freewheeling system last year, and so did Brandon Lloyd. And now you're wondering, oh boy, they're going to go to Fox's ground and pound all day, and no Sean Moreno and Willis McGahee are going to be beneficiaries of that. But Orton and Lloyd could see a big drop. And the funny thing is, Tebow would actually fit that ground and pound mold more than Orton. But he's a young guy, so Fox isn't going to play.
Exactly. Remember last year also there were several Broncos wide receivers that had a little bit of fantasy relevance, including Jabbar Gaffney. And now with John Fotts there, seeing what we saw in Carolina, that's going to be unlikely. Even with run-of-the-mill, we're not going to see the run-of-the-mill wide receivers even approaching fantasy relevance.
Well, Brandon Lloyd is the fall guy in this year's drafts. Nobody wants to touch him because at age 29 he had that breakout year. Mm-hmm. And with Fox coming in, he's expected to drop off. And then after that you have Eddie Royal, Eric Decker, Demaryius Thomas.
I guess Royal has proven the upside in at least 1 year.
He has, but, maybe as a PPR option in the middle of the field I see him, but not going to score a lot of touchdowns, I wouldn't think.
Let's talk about the last team in the AFC West, and actually my pick to be a wild card team in the AFC this year. Call me crazy, but I really do think that Jason Campbell has been underrated in his pro career, his entire pro career, because really there isn't that much difference between him and all of those other middling quarterbacks. He's borderline top 10 quarterback in the league in real life. And then on top of that, he's actually got a few weapons around him right now, especially in the backfield where Darren McFadden had an amazing breakthrough season.
He did. And, if you base it on last year, he should go in the first round. But you have to think McFadden has only had 1 year. He already had an injury in camp, a fractured orbital bone, so you're thinking, oh boy, oh boy, should I really spend a first-round pick on this guy? I would be careful. I think the second round feels a little bit better to me. Campbell certainly has shown some flashes at times of being a competent NFL quarterback. I think the jury's still a little bit out on him, though, and now that Jacoby Ford has a broken hand and he lost Zach Miller to the Seahawks, he's going to have some adjustments there. So I'm a little bit skeptical about whether Campbell can make the next step. I think Hugh Jackson's going to be more like leaning on Darren McFadden right now.
Yeah, one of the things, if I may make clear, is that that's a real-life thing and not so much fantasy. Fantasy-wise, Campbell's strengths don't really lend themselves to fantasy purposes. And the best thing I think we can hope for from the Raiders is that they kind of do what the Panthers did way back in their glory days 2 years ago with D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, where, they're both guys are fantasy stalwarts, and you can start both of those guys with McFadden and then whoever else emerges, whether it's Bush or whomever, behind him.
Right, and, it's going to be grounded out all the way, and the positive thing about that is that some of the teams in their division have struggled to stop the run.
Yeah. What about the Raiders receivers? Is there anybody that's even remotely interesting there as a late-round type guy?
I like Jacoby Ford had he been healthy. He can score in a myriad of ways, receiving, running on an end around or on a return. He's just got unbelievable speed. He's like a lower value. He's like a lower class. I don't want to say lower class, but like Deshaun Jackson in some ways. Darius Hayward-Bay still trying to get it, though. Lewis Murphy, I don't know. So I think Ford's the main guy you look at there.
Yeah, Bay, oh goodness, Darius Hayward-Bay. Let's not talk about him. That's just a painful situation all the way around, even if you're a Raider hater. Yeah. And then Lewis Murphy, let's call him what he is. He's a third receiver. But, again, if he has to step in there, he might, it might be worthwhile.
Well, then you have the perennial sleeper pick, Chaz Schilens.
Oh, of course. You can't forget about Chaz Schilens. Yeah. I would say this: they do have the best names in the receiving corps in the NFL. Throw in Kevin Boss, and they're gold.
And they do have one of the strongest kickers too in Janikowski.
Yes, they do. Don't forget that kicker if you're going to be picking ahead of the final round. George, thanks for joining us. Talk about the AFC West.
Thank you.